In Romans chapter 1, and you don't need to turn there, but verse 18 says this. After Paul finishes saying, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of God, for in it is revealed, it's the power of God. It is the power of God unto salvation. For in it is revealed the righteousness of God. And then he goes on to say this, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And then he goes on and describes the downward spiral of man apart from God. No one has an excuse. Everyone knows about God. Creation cries out his name to anyone who will hear. And so no one has an excuse and says, gosh, I didn't know. You were born in this earth, in this universe. Yes, you knew there was a God. And if you would have acknowledged that, he would have revealed himself more to you. But instead, man turned. And two things are said in that downward spiral. In verse 23 of chapter 1, it talks about they changed the glory of God into an image of man or animals. Changed the glory of God. And that's what Jeroboam did. He changed the glory of God. God said, don't make an image of me. You can't imagine what I look like. My glory is so far beyond what you could imagine. I don't want you building an image of me, because then you will have a limitation of who I am. Because you'll think of this image. When I was growing up, I figured God wore a white flowing robe. He had white, long hair, for which I justified my own long hair in those days, and a white beard, and he sat on a throne, and he was rather like a wise and kindly grandfather. And even in my rebellious days, totally away from God, in one of my college courses, it was an art course, and we did engraving. And I did an engraving of God, of my image of God, and it was this, this white flowing hair and beard and so forth. That was it. That was my image of God. We are called not to make any graven image. That's clearly spelled out in the Ten Commandments. But beyond that, we need to be careful about what kind of image of God we apply to him. Certainly, the Scripture uses some imagery to let us know what God's nature is. But we can't think that, well, that's the way he is. The Scripture in the Old Testament talks about God as a mother taking care of her children, father, various images of God. But you remember when Isaiah saw the Lord high and lifted up, when Ezekiel saw a vision of the Lord's throne, they don't describe the Lord. They describe the fire and glory and the sound and the angels and all of these things, but they don't describe the Lord, except perhaps to say this bright light. That's about all that comes out. Because we can't imagine how big God is. And as soon as we start putting that image in our mind, we begin to limit God in our own minds. Jeroboam set up the 2 golden calves and said, these are the gods who delivered you from Egypt. He wasn't denying God. He was changing his attributes and glory from the truth into ideas that reflect man's nature or animal nature. And that still happens today. There are some who are not of the faith, and yet it's hard to tell sometimes because they use a lot of the same words, and they use the same book, maybe their own version, but pretty much the same book. But they come up with these ideas about God that you kind of go, well, where exactly in the Scripture does it say that? And you'll usually get some kind of runaround. But they take the glory of the true God and put him into an image of man. Paul had a hard time with those who were called the Judaizers. The Judaizers were the ones who said, yeah, Jesus is Messiah, absolutely. Yep, he's Messiah, promised. And in order to follow him, you must follow the Old Testament law. Whether you are a Gentile or whether you were born a Jew, you must be circumcised, you got to follow the kosher law, follow all of this stuff. Paul said, no, that's the good news of the gospel is we're free from the law. What the law couldn't do for us, Jesus did at the cross. And we are free from the law. Paul had a hard time with them because what they were doing was changing an attribute of God. His mercy and His grace. They were turning the grace of God into law. Saying, yeah, well, Jesus saved you by grace, but now you got to say it, saved by following the law. No. He says, who fooled you? Who put a spell on you? Having begun by the Spirit, are you going to finish by the letter of the law? Having been saved by grace, will you now try and stay saved by the law? Brothers and sisters, if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, you are just as dependent on God's grace today as you were the day that you surrendered to Him. That is where your salvation lies. And all of the wonderful things that God has done in you, or gifts He has given you, or blessings He's given you, opportunities to minister, all of those things are a gift of God. They're not yours. They're a gift. So why act as if there's something that you came up with on your own? They're a gift, and a gift you don't earn. A gift you are given. And in God's case, He gave us a gift that we didn't deserve. We not only couldn't earn, we didn't deserve it. And yet He gave it to us anyway. He is so good. But in verse 25 of chapter 1 of Romans, the word changes there, and it says they exchanged the truth of God for the lie. That's different. Those two little words mean something different. If I change something, then I'm taking its nature and describing it as something else. If I exchange something, well, I had to do that yesterday when I landed in Atlanta. I had about 100 euros in my pocket, and I went up to the currency exchange. And I gave them euros, and they gave me dollars. Not as many dollars as I would have hoped. Actually, in that exchange, you want to have fewer dollars, meaning that dollar is strong, but it's getting better. But anyway, it was an exchange. I no longer had euros in my hand. I had American dollars in my hand. Now, you could say I had money in both cases. And here you could say, yeah, they got religion in both cases. But have exchanged the following of God, even in an altered state of changing who God is or what His attributes are, but now exchanging the truth of God for the lie. No, I'm not following Yahweh anymore. No, I'm not following Him. I'm following Baal. And that's exactly what Ahab did. I'm not following God. I don't believe in Jehovah. I'm not following that stuff. Even if you say he's a golden calf up here, no, I am turning fully and completely and following Baal. He traded in the Lord for a lie. And how sad that there are so many people in this world who have traded in the Lord for a lie. And we can look at all kinds of reasons that bring them to that place. I myself traded the Lord for a lie. I grew up in a home where I learned something of the Bible. I grew up in a liturgical church that didn't focus on the Bible, but focused on sacramentalism. But I heard most of the Bible stories, the major ones anyway. But it had no life. I saw no relevance for the days I lived in. And so I exchanged that truth. I didn't understand or fully comprehend that truth, but I had a glimpse of it, and I exchanged that for the lie of the day. Sex, drugs, rock and roll. Tune in, turn on, drop out. Find meaning through LSD, through transcendental meditation, through astral projection, through spiritism. Those are the things I followed. I was no longer seeking Jesus Christ. I was seeking after Satan, but I called him something else. I didn't know that's who I was seeking after, but that's who I was finding on every one of those roads.